Last class we started talking about what it was to complete the square. So I need to make sure everybody has paper on your desk as well as 2 highlighters to make sure we can all get through this together. So last class we talked about, it should not write like that. Let's try this. Completing the square. If I can spell. Alright, so completing the square. So let's review what completing the square was. So if I have x squared plus 6x, and I want to complete the square, what that means is I want to complete my trinomial. So usually when you're factoring, you usually have 3 terms, but notice I only have 2 terms. So to complete the square, I got to find that 3rd term of my trinomial. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take half of my middle term. So I'm going to take, my middle term is 6, so I'm going to take half of 6, so half of 6 is 3, and then I'm going to square it. So I'm going to square it, I'm going to get plus 9. And after I complete the square that way, I'm now going to factor it. So if I draw my x, 9 goes on the top, 6 goes on the bottom. Factors of 9 that make 6, 3 and 3. So I have x plus 3 and x plus 3. Because these are the same, I have a prettier way of writing it. I can say x plus 3 squared. Let's look at one more. Let's do x squared minus 12x. Complete the square. So in order to complete the square, I got to find my 3rd piece of my trinomial. So how I complete it is I'm going to take half of my middle number. So half of negative 12 is negative 6. And then I'm going to square it, and I'm going to get positive 36. So after you complete the square, you take half and you square it. I'm now going to factor it. So 36 goes on the top, negative 12 goes on the bottom. Factors of 36 that make negative 12. 6 and 6, but they both have to be negative. So x minus 6 and x minus 6. So I can write this prettier, x minus 6 squared. I hope you're noticing that when you complete the square, these are always the same. And that's why they get the name complete the square, is because they're squares of each other. So we talked about this a lot more in detail last class, but today we're going to talk about, well, how can I solve an equation by completing the square? So, how do I solve an equation by completing the square? So we have a purpose of why we do this. So purpose. Why am I going to try and teach you another way to solve a quadratic equation? How many of you in the room like the quadratic formula? Chances are maybe one of you is raising your hand. Nobody likes the quadratic formula because it's long, obnoxious, you have to plug numbers in, you got to do PEMDAS, and we always make mistakes. We don't like quadratic formula. But if I were to solve an equation by completing the square, I'm going to get the same answer if I don't want to do the quadratic formula. So purpose, when I cannot factor an equation and I hate the quadratic formula. So the sole purpose of using the completing the square method is when you cannot factor an equation and you absolutely hate the quadratic formula. If you hate the quadratic formula, completing the square gives you an alternate way to solve a problem. However, before we actually get into solving equations by completing the square, let's review something real quick. X squared equals 25. So I see an x squared in my equation. My brain has a light bulb that goes off. It immediately tells me I have to factor. So in order to factor, what do I got to do? I gotta subtract 25 on both sides. So I have x squared minus 25 equals 0. So now I'm going to factor. Negative 25 goes on the top. What goes on the bottom? 0. Factors of negative 25 that make 0, 5, and negative 5. So I have x plus 5, and I have x minus 5 equals 0. So now I'm going to split it up. Over here, what's x equal? Negative 5. Over here, what's x equal? Positive 5. So x could either be positive 5 or it could be negative 5. There's actually an alternate way in which you can solve this problem. If I rewrite this problem over here and write x squared equals 25, technically I don't have to factor this equation. Technically x is almost by itself. The only thing that's connected with x is this squared. So how I would get this squared away from x is I would square root it. So if I square root x on both sides, I'm going to say x equals 5, because the square root of 25 is 5. Hopefully you're agreeing with me. But notice this answer and these answers don't match, because this answer is negative and positive. I have 2 of them. This over here, I only have 1 answer. So ladies and gentlemen, I hate to break it to you, but your teachers have actually been lying to you. Whenever you square root a number, it can be positive 5, but it could also be negative 5. Because if I plugged in 5 into x squared, and I said, okay, 5 squared is 25, that works. What if I plug negative 5 in? Negative 5 squared, well, that also equals 25. So whenever you square root a number, your answer is actually positive or it's negative. So mathematicians think this is a super long, drawn-out way of writing their answer. So all they write is x equals plus or minus 5. X is positive 5, x is positive 5, or x is negative 5. They think this is much quicker than writing this. So let's try another one. If I look at this problem, y squared equals 36. So you have a couple options. You could factor this equation if you wanted to, or since y is almost by itself, all I have to do is square root, so y equals not just 6 plus or minus 6. Because y could be positive 6 or y could be negative 6, and it's still going to make this original statement true. So you never want to forget this plus or minus whenever you square root. This is the #1 boo-boo that people forget. And there's always a reason for my madness. Why I'm doing this is so we can be successful when it comes to completing the square. Awesome. Try this one on your own. X squared plus 2 equals 51. So pause this video, try solving this problem, and then unpause it and we'll go over it. So I'm going to subtract 2 first. So I have x squared equals 49. So now I'm going to square root, so I don't have to factor because this is quicker. So x equals what? Plus or minus 7. So hopefully everybody is okay with this. So, how do I solve a complete the square problem? Hopefully that's what our end goal is here today. 5 steps for me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Step 1, move all variables to the left. So I'm going to move all my variables to the left. And step 2, I'm going to move all constants to the right. And when I'm talking about left versus right, I'm talking about to the left of the equal sign or to the right of the equal sign. So step 1, I'm going to move all my variables to the left, and step 2, I'm going to move all my constants to the right of the equal sign. And in reality, you really want to do these 2 steps at the exact same time. So do together. That's the plan. Step 3, I'm going to complete the square on left side. That's the hardest step. If you can do step 3, you are golden. And that's what was on your homework last class, was to complete the square. Step 4, factor left side. And step 5 is solve for x by square rooting first. So hopefully none of this makes sense to you at the moment. However, when we get to solving these problems, hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. So make sure you pause this video if you are not all done copying down the instructions or the steps on how to solve a complete the square problem, because I'm going to move on. So let's look at our first example. X squared plus 8x minus 9 equals 0. So in reality, I would probably try to factor this equation first. However, I'm telling you not to factor because I want to practice solving by completing the square instead. So step 1, move all your variables to the left. So I'm going to put all my variables on the left side, and I'm going to put all my constants on the right side, because step 2 says put all my constants on the right side. So I'm going to preview this equation, and I'm going to circle my constant. So my constant is -9. So I need to move -9 to the right side. So how do I move -9 to the other side? Well, I'm going to add 9. So alright, I'm going to have x squared plus 8x. And because I'm setting up good habits, when I put all my variables on the left side, I'm not going to leave a blank. And that's going to equal 0 plus 9, which is 9. So step 1, move all my variables to the left. They're all on the left side. Step 2, move all my constants to the right. They're on the right side. Step 3, complete the square of the left. So I'm going to look at my left side. I'm going to complete the square. So let's review. How do I complete the square? I take half of my middle term, and then I square it. So it's half of my middle term. So my middle term is 8. So I'm going to take half of my middle term, which is 4, and now I'm going to square it. So I'm going to add 16. Ladies and gentlemen, here's where you really want to make sure you're paying attention. Notice I magically, for some unknown reason, I added 16 on this side of my equal sign. I added 16 on this side of my equal sign because I completed the square. But if you wish to keep your equation balanced, which you have to in math, because what you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. Because you magically added 16 on this side of the equal sign, you have to magically add 16 on that side of the equal sign. So I'm going to add 16 on this side of my equal sign as well. That is the number 1 mistake. You're going to forget to add this number on the other side of the equal sign. So step 4, what's it say? Factor. So great. So I'll draw my little x here, 16 and 8. Factors 4 and 4. So I already noticed 4 and 4 are the same. I'm already just going to skip that step and immediately go here. Hopefully you're okay with how I did that. So x plus 4 squared equals, I got to clean up 9 plus 16. So 9 plus 16 is 25. All right, next step, last step, it says solve for x by square rooting first. So notice my goal in this equation is to get x by itself, right? So to get x by itself, the furthest thing away from x is this squared. So how do I get x alone? Well, I got to square root it. So I'm going to square root on both sides. So my square root and my squared cancel each other out. So I'm left with x plus 4. Well, what's the square root of 25? I hope you didn't just say 5. It's plus or minus 5. All right, so now what are you going to do? I got to get x alone. I'm going to subtract 4 on both sides. I'm always going to put 4 in the front of plus or minus because it makes my life easier. So this number that I subtract is always going to go up in the front. So -4 plus or minus 5. So notice we've seen this plus or minus thing before. Where have we seen this? We've seen that on the quadratic formula because it takes us in our 2 paths. I can say -4 plus 5, or I can say -4 minus 5. So -4 plus 5, well that's 1, so that's one answer. -4 minus 5, well that's -9. That's my other answer. So x equals 1 and x equals -9. If I had to solve this problem with the quadratic formula, guess what my answers would be? 1 and -9. If I had to factor this equation, guess what my answers would have been? 1 and -9. Let's try another one. Let's try x squared minus 4x minus 6 equals 0. So when I start solving by completing the square, I'm always previewing for my constants. So my constant's -6. I got to move that to the other side. So how do I move -6 to the other side? Well, I'm going to add 6. So I'm going to put all my x's on the left, all my variables on the left, and I'm going to leave a blank because I'm going to get in good habits and I'm going to organize my work. And I'm going to add 6 to the other side. All right, so all my variables are on the left, all my constants are on the right. What's my next step? I got to complete the square. So I got to take half my middle term, so it's half of -4, -2, square it. I get +4. Because you magically added 4 over here, I have to magically add 4 on the other side. It keeps my equation balanced. So now I'm going to factor. Draw my x, 4 and -4. Factors are -2 and -2. So I can immediately just write x minus 2 squared because they're the same. And 6 plus 4 is 10. From here, solve for x by factoring first. No, not by factoring first. How about by square rooting first? Solve for x by square rooting first. So square root, square root. So these cancel out. I'm left with x minus 2. Square root of 10. I get 3.16. So I'm going to say 3.2. And if I leave this, I'm losing a point because I got to remember plus or minus. So now what are you going to do to get x by itself? I'm going to add 2. That number you're moving to the other side always goes in the front. So x equals 2 plus or minus 3.2. So now I'm at my two paths. I'm going to split it up. 2 plus 3.2 or 2 minus 3.2. 2 plus 3.2. Oh, I did minus first, sorry. 2 minus 3.2 is negative 1.2. And 2 plus 3.2 is 5.2. And I'm done. This takes practice, but it actually is a little bit quicker than the quadratic formula if you get more comfortable with it. So go ahead and let's try another one. Let's try this one more together and then we'll practice them on our own. X squared plus 6x plus 1 equals 0. So, step 1, all my variables to the left. Step 2, all my constants to the right. So I'm previewing for constants, I'm circling them, I'm moving them to the other side. How would I move one to the other side? Well, I'd subtract it. So I have x squared plus 6x, leave a blank, equals negative 1. So, what do I do now? I gotta complete the square. So I'm going to take half of 6, 3, square it, 9. So I'm going to magically add 9 on this side. Because I'm magically adding 9 on that side, I've got to magically add 9 on my other side. So now I'm going to factor my left side. 9 on the top, 6 on the bottom. Factors, 3 and 3. So I have x plus 3 squared equals 8. I hope you're noticing that this number is always the half of your b, half of your middle term. So this number inside your parentheses is always half of this. So if you want to skip doing that and memorize that, you can also do that. That's fine. All right, what am I going to do now? I'm going to get x by itself. So what am I going to do first? Square root, square root. So I have x plus 3 equals, the square root of 8 is 2.8. If I leave this, I'm losing points, plus or minus. What am I going to do now to get x by itself? I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. That number, this number, always goes in the front and makes your life easier. X equals negative 3 plus or minus 2.8. I'm now taking this down 2 rows. 3 plus 2.8, 3 minus 2.8. Ooh, totally messed up. It's negative 3, I'm sorry. Negative 3 plus 2.8, negative 3 minus 2.8. So negative 3 plus 2.8 is negative 0.2. That's one answer. Negative 3 minus 2.8 is negative 5.8. Hopefully everybody is with me. If you have questions, make sure you're pausing this video and asking any questions that you have. Try this one on your own. X squared plus 20x plus 40 equals 0. So go ahead, pause this video, try this on your own. When you finish, then unpause it, and we will go over it together. So I gotta move all my variables to the left and all my constants to the right. So I'm gonna subtract 40 first. So now I have x squared plus 20x, leave a blank, equals negative 40. So now I'm going to complete the square on this middle term. So half of 20 is 10. 10 squared is 100. Because you magically added 100 to that side, I got to magically add 100 to that side. So now I'm going to factor. Oh, let me change my color back to black. It's always like this. It's going to be x plus 10, because this term is always half, which is 10, equals negative 40 plus 100 is 60. So I'm going to solve for x by doing what first? By square rooting. So I have x plus 10 equals, square root of 60 is 7.7. Okay. However, plus or minus. I'm now going to subtract 10 on both sides. So I have x equals negative 10 plus or minus 7.7. Take it down 2 rows. Negative 10 plus 7.7, negative 10 minus 7.7. Negative 10 plus 7.7 is negative 2.3. And negative 10 minus 7.7 is negative 17.7. Hopefully you're all doing okay. Let's go ahead and try one more. One more as a class, and then you can practice some problems on your own. Let's do this one. X squared minus 6x minus 4 equals negative 8. Go ahead, pause this video. When you finish trying this problem on your own, unpause the video and we'll go over it together. So I'm looking for my constants. I'm moving it to the right. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So I have x squared minus 6x, leave a blank. Notice here I got to combine like terms. Negative 8 and 4, negative 4. So now I'm going to complete the square. Half of negative 6, negative 3, squared, positive 9. Because you magically added 9 here, I'm going to magically add 9 there. So now I'm going to go ahead and factor. X minus 3. It's minus because this one, the middle term, is negative. Equals 5. So now I'm going to square root on both sides. I have x minus 3 equals whatever the square root of 5 is, plus or minus 2.2. So now I'm going to add 3. So I have x equals 3 plus or minus 2.2, which takes me down 2 paths. 3 plus 2.2, which is 5.2. And 3 minus 2.2 is 0.8. Hopefully you're okay with this. We're going to now go ahead and practice some problems.